Rain battered the marble steps of the Collins estate like a warning from the heavens, washing away sins that money usually kept hidden. Deep in the secluded woods of upstate New York, an heir to a criminal empire lay trapped beneath a foot of wet soil, his tiny lungs fighting for the last pockets of air. His own soon-to-be stepmother had patted the dirt down with a silver-plated shovel. No highly trained bodyguard or ruthless enforcer came to his rescue. Instead, salvation arrived in the form of an overlooked, overweight housekeeper with blistered hands and a heart too large for her own safety. To survive in the household of Aurelian Collins, one had to master the art of invisibility. Aurelian was not merely a wealthy businessman. He was the head of the Collins Syndicate, an organization that controlled the shipping ports from Brooklyn to Boston. His sprawling estate in Oyster Bay, Long Island, was a fortress of limestone, wrought iron, and dark secrets. Dozens of staff moved through its echoing halls, but none were as invisible as Cosima Bailey. Cosima was a woman of substantial size, carrying heavily padded shoulders, thick arms, and a soft, wide waist beneath her starched grey uniform. At 42, her weight had always been a shield against the cruelties of the world, making people look past her, dismiss her, or simply ignore her. In a mansion where Aurelian's enforcers paraded their muscular physiques and his guests flaunted their designer silhouettes, Cosima was part of the furniture. She was the woman who polished the mahogany banisters, the one who scrubbed the imported Italian marble until it gleamed, and the one who always kept her head down. She breathed heavily when she climbed the grand staircase, and the younger, sleeker maids often snickered behind her back. But Cosima did not care. She had only one reason to stay in this house of dangerous men: a 5-year-old boy named Leo. Leo Collins was a ghost of a child. Following the violent death of his mother, Catherine, 3 years prior, a casualty of a rival family's car bomb, the boy had stopped speaking entirely. He was pale, with dark, soulful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of his father's sins. Aurelian loved his son, but a mafia boss didn't have the time or the emotional capacity to nurture a traumatized child. Instead, Aurelian surrounded the boy with expensive toys, private tutors, and armed guards. But it was Cosima who truly raised him. Her wide, soft lap was the only place Leo felt safe. When the thunderstorms rolled off the Atlantic, shaking the heavy windows of the mansion, it was Cosima who waddled up to his room, her heavy footsteps a comforting rhythm. She would wrap her thick arms around him, smelling of lavender soap and fresh-baked bread, and hum old lullabies until his trembling stopped. To Leo, Cosima's large frame was not a subject of mockery. It was a fortress. She was his warmth in a house made of ice. The fragile peace of Leo's existence was shattered the day Aurelian brought Beatrice Montgomery into their home. Beatrice was a breathtaking socialite from a Manhattan family whose old money had dried up decades ago. She was 26, sharp-featured, with icy blonde hair and a figure carved from starvation and ambition. She possessed a ruthless intellect and a singular goal: to secure the Collins empire for herself and her future bloodline. Aurelian, blinded by her refined beauty and the polished legitimacy she offered his dark world, fell hard. Within 6 months, he proposed. From the moment Beatrice stepped into the Oyster Bay estate, the atmosphere curdled. She fired half the staff within a week, replacing them with people loyal only to her. Cosima survived the purge simply because Beatrice deemed her too pathetic to be a threat. "Keep the fat one," Beatrice had drawled to the head butler, her manicured finger pointing lazily at Cosima. "She's built for the heavy lifting, and she doesn't talk back. Just keep her out of my sight." Cosima swallowed the humiliation, keeping her eyes fixed on her sensible black shoes. As long as she could stay near Leo, she would endure any insult. But Beatrice's cruelty soon found a new target. She despised the boy. To Beatrice, Leo was not just a mute, a damaged child. He was the primary heir to Aurelian's massive fortune. He was the only obstacle standing between her and total control. When Aurelian was present, Beatrice played the role of the doting future stepmother, forcing tight smiles and patting Leo's head. But the moment Aurelian left for his business meetings, the mask slipped. Cosima witnessed it all from the shadows. She saw Beatrice snatch a silver toy train from Leo's hands and throw it into the fireplace, whispering venomous words into the boy's ear. She saw the way Beatrice looked at Leo, not as a child, but as an infection that needed to be cured. One evening in late October, the tension in the house reached a boiling point. Aurelian was preparing to leave for a crucial, week-long sit-down with a rival syndicate in Chicago. The mansion was in a frenzy of packing and security briefings. Cosima was in the kitchen, carefully arranging a plate of warm snickerdoodles for Leo, when she overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. Beatrice was standing in the adjacent pantry, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to her personal driver, a towering, dead-eyed man named Donovan. "Aurelian will be gone for 7 days," Beatrice said, her voice like cracking ice. "The timing won't get better than this. The boy is already sickly. Children have tragic accidents all the time, Donovan. They wander off. They fall into the old quarry. They get lost in the woods. Mr. Collins will tear the world apart looking for him," Donovan replied, his voice a low rumble. "Let him," Beatrice countered smoothly. "He will mourn, and I will comfort him. And then we will have our own children, legitimate children, not the broken leftovers of his dead wife. Are the preparations made at the old greenhouse?" "The soil is loose from the renovations," Donovan confirmed. "No one goes out there. But what about the guards?" "I've already reassigned the night shift to the perimeter. The house will be ours. Tomorrow night, we clear the board." Cosima stood frozen behind the swinging kitchen door, the plate of cookies trembling in her heavy hands. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest heaving against her tight uniform. They were going to kill him. This beautiful, elegant monster was going to murder a 5-year-old boy. Panic surged through Cosima's veins. She knew she couldn't tell Aurelian. Aurelian was blinded by his fiancée, and Cosima was just a fat, aging maid. If she spoke out without proof, Beatrice would twist the story, and Cosima would end up buried in a landfill. She had to protect Leo herself. But as she looked down at her thick, shaking hands, a crushing sense of inadequacy washed over her. How could she, a woman who lost her breath climbing 2 flights of stairs, stop the machinery of a Mafia Boss's ruthless fiancé? The next day, the Oyster Bay estate felt like a tomb. Aurelian departed for Chicago at dawn, taking his most loyal enforcers with him. The moment his black SUV rolled past the iron gates, Beatrice seized total command. She dismissed the daytime staff early, claiming she had a migraine and wanted absolute silence in the manor. Cosima was ordered to remain in her quarters in the basement. As night fell, a violent autumn storm rolled in from the Atlantic. Rain lashed against the towering windows of the mansion, and thunder shook the foundation. In her small, damp basement room, Cosima paced frantically. Every instinct screamed at her to run upstairs, grab Leo, and flee into the night. But the security cameras were still active, and Donovan was patrolling the main halls. If she made a move too early, they would both be caught. Around midnight, Cosima crept up the servants' staircase. Her heavy steps were perfectly timed to the crashes of thunder outside. She squeezed her large frame into the narrow alcove near the grand foyer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. From her vantage point, she saw the glow of a fireplace in the sitting room. Beatrice was there, wearing a silk dressing gown, pouring a cup of hot chocolate from a silver thermos. Cosima watched in horror as Beatrice produced a small glass vial from her pocket and emptied its clear contents into the mug. She stirred it with a delicate silver spoon, a grotesque smile playing on her lips. "Donovan," Beatrice called out softly. The hulking driver emerged from the hallway, leading a sleepy, confused Leo by the wrist. The boy was in his blue cotton pajamas, clutching his threadbare stuffed bear. He looked so incredibly small, so fragile. "Let him go," Beatrice instructed. She knelt down, holding out the steaming mug. "Here you go, little prince. Drink up. It will help you sleep through the storm." Leo hesitated. He looked at Beatrice with wide, distrusting eyes. But Donovan stepped closer, his massive hand resting menacingly on the boy's shoulder. With trembling hands, Leo took the mug and drank. Cosima clamped a hand over her own mouth to stifle a sob. She wanted to scream, to burst into the room and tear Beatrice apart, but her feet felt like lead. She knew if she revealed herself now, Donovan would snap her neck without a second thought, and Leo would be truly alone. She had to wait. She had to follow them. It didn't take long for the heavy sedative to take effect. Within 10 minutes, the empty mug slipped from Leo's fingers, shattering on the Persian rug. The boy's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, unconscious. Beatrice looked down at the lifeless form of her future stepson, stepping over the broken porcelain. "Bring him," she ordered. "The rain will wash away any tracks. Let's get this over with." Donovan scooped the boy up like a rag doll and followed Beatrice out the side door into the howling storm. Cosima waited exactly 60 seconds before stepping out of the shadows. She ignored the pain in her knees and the tightness in her chest as she practically threw herself out the same side door. The cold rain hit her like a physical blow, instantly soaking her grey uniform and pasting her greying hair to her face. She followed the faint beams of Donovan's flashlight through the sprawling, manicured gardens, heading toward the overgrown western edge of the estate. Here, an abandoned Victorian greenhouse stood in ruins. Its glass panes were shattered, and thick vines choked its iron frame. Aurelian had recently ordered it demolished and excavated, leaving a large, deep trench of turned earth inside the structure. Cosima moved as quietly as her heavy frame allowed, using the roar of the wind to mask the sound of her footsteps in the mud. She crouched behind a decaying stone fountain just outside the greenhouse, peering through the broken glass. Inside, Donovan had laid Leo's limp body on the wet ground. Beatrice stood over him, holding a flashlight. The beam illuminated the deep pit of loose, muddy earth that the contractors had dug the week before. "Toss him in," Beatrice commanded, her voice barely audible over the storm. Donovan lifted the boy and unceremoniously dropped him into the 3-foot trench. Leo didn't make a sound. He didn't twitch. The sedative had pulled him into a dark abyss. Cosima bit down on her own fist so hard she tasted blood. "He's alive," she told herself frantically. "He's just sleeping. Please, God, let him be alive." Beatrice picked up a shovel that the workman had left behind. She looked down into the pit, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her beautiful face. "Goodbye, little prince," she whispered. With a swift, practiced motion, Beatrice scooped a heavy load of wet dirt and dumped it directly over the boy. Cosima's mind snapped. The primal, protective instinct of a mother who had lost her own infant daughter to fever 20 years ago, exploded within her. But she forced herself to remain glued to the stone fountain. If she charged in, Donovan would kill her. She had to wait for them to leave. Shovel by shovel, Beatrice and Donovan filled the trench. The wet earth hit the boy's pajama-clad body, covering his legs, his torso, and finally, his small, pale face. They packed the dirt down with the flat of the shovel, leveling the ground so it looked like nothing more than a freshly turned flower bed. The rain would settle the soil by morning, leaving no trace of a burial. "It's done," Donovan said, wiping mud from his hands. "He'll suffocate in minutes. Even if he wakes up, the dirt is too heavy. He can't move." Beatrice tossed the shovel aside. "Let's get back inside. I need a hot bath. Tomorrow morning, I will wake up and discover the boy is missing. We will call the police, and I will play the hysterical, grieving fiancé." They turned and walked out of the greenhouse, passing within 5 feet of where Cosima was hiding. Cosima held her breath until her lungs burned, pressing her large body flat against the cold stone, praying the darkness would conceal her. As soon as the glow of their flashlight faded toward the mansion, Cosima lunged forward. Cosima scrambled over the shattered threshold of the greenhouse, her knees slamming into the hard, wet ground. The interior was pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the terrifyingly smooth patch of fresh mud. She threw herself onto the center of the disturbed earth. She had no shovel, she had no tools. She only had her bare hands and a desperate, agonizing love for the boy buried beneath her. "Leo!" she screamed, the wind tearing the sound from her lips. She plunged her thick fingers into the cold, dense mud. The rain had turned the soil into heavy clay, making it incredibly difficult to move. Cosima clawed at the earth like a wild animal. The mud caked under her fingernails, tearing at her cuticles until they bled. But she didn't feel the pain. 1 minute, she thought, panic accelerating her heart rate to a dangerous rhythm. How long has he been under? 2 minutes? 3? Her weight, which had always been a source of shame and sluggishness, suddenly became her greatest weapon. A smaller, weaker woman would have struggled to displace the heavy, compacted mud. But Cosima used her sheer mass, throwing her entire upper body into the effort, using her broad shoulders and thick arms to scoop away massive chunks of earth. She dug with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, grunting and weeping, her tears mixing with the rain and mud. "Come on, sweet boy," she sobbed, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. "Come back to Cosima, please." Her fingers struck something soft. Fabric. "Leo!" She dug faster, ignoring the sharp rocks that sliced into her palms. She uncovered his small arm, then his chest. He was buried deep. Beatrice had made sure of it. Cosima gripped the boy's arm and pulled with all her might. The suction of the wet mud fought back, trying to keep its prize, but Cosima braced her heavy thighs against the ground, leaned back, and hoisted the child from the grave. Leo's body popped free from the earth with a sickening, wet sound. Cosima pulled him into her lap. It was too dark to see the color of his skin, but she could feel the horrifying stillness of his chest. He was completely limp, coated in mud, his mouth and nose packed with dirt. He wasn't breathing. "No, no, no!" Cosima wailed, a sound of pure agony echoing in the glass ruins. She acted purely on instinct. She quickly wiped the thick mud from his mouth and nose with the hem of her wet dress. She laid him flat on the cold ground, tilted his chin back, and pinched his tiny nose. She covered his mouth with hers and breathed in. 1, 2. She placed her large, calloused hands over his small sternum. Because of her size and strength, she had to be careful not to crush his ribs, pressing down gently but firmly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She breathed into him again. The taste of damp earth and metallic blood filled her mouth. "Wake up, Leo. You don't get to leave me. Do you hear me?" She screamed at the unmoving child, alternating between chest compressions and breaths. Her own heart felt like it was going to explode. Her chest tightened, black spots dancing in her vision from the intense physical exertion. She was overweight, exhausted, and running on pure adrenaline. But she refused to stop. She poured her own life force into the boy, her large body acting as a massive generator of heat in the freezing rain, sheltering him from the wind. She wrapped her thick coat around his muddy form, pulling him tightly against her ample bosom, pressing her ear to his chest. Silence. "God, please!" Cosima screamed at the dark sky above the broken glass roof. "Take me! I'm nothing! Take me, and let him live!" Suddenly, a violent spasm racked Leo's small frame. Cosima jerked back as the boy's chest heaved. A horrible, wet, choking sound erupted from his throat. Cosima quickly turned him onto his side and struck him firmly between the shoulder blades. Leo coughed violently, expelling a mixture of hot chocolate, mud, and stomach acid onto the greenhouse floor. He took a sharp, ragged gasp of air, his tiny lungs expanding. He was breathing. It was shallow, it was forced, but he was breathing. Cosima collapsed backward, pulling the coughing, freezing child onto her massive chest, wrapping her thick arms around him like a cocoon. She rocked him back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. "I've got you," she wept into his muddy hair. "Cosima's got you. You're safe." Leo, still groggy from the sedative and the trauma, weakly grabbed fistfuls of Cosima's soaked uniform, burying his face into the warmth of her neck. But the relief was short-lived. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the greenhouse, bringing Cosima crashing back to reality. She had just undone a murder committed by the future wife of a mafia boss. If Beatrice found out the boy was alive, she wouldn't just kill Leo, she would slaughter Cosima too. And when Aurelian returned, Beatrice would spin a web of lies, framing the fat, disgruntled maid for kidnapping and harming the heir. They could not go back to the mansion. They could not call the local police. Aurelian had half the precinct on his payroll. There was only one option. They had to disappear. Cosima forced herself to her feet, her muscles screaming in protest. She gathered the shivering child in her arms. He felt lighter now, but her own body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She couldn't walk out the front gates. The perimeter guards would shoot her on sight. She remembered the old service road that ran behind the estate, used by landscapers and caterers. Parked near the back sheds was an old, beat-up station wagon that the groundskeeper used to haul fertilizer. The keys were usually kept under the floor mat. Cosima trudged through the mud, carrying Leo against her chest. The rain battered them, but Cosima used her broad back to shield the boy from the worst of the wind. She navigated the dark woods entirely by memory, terrified that at any moment Donovan's flashlight would cut through the trees. After what felt like hours, the rusted shape of the station wagon appeared in the gloom. Cosima practically ripped the door open, deposited Leo on the passenger seat, and frantically searched the floorboards. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. The keys. She jammed the key into the ignition. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life, drowning out the sound of the thunder. Cosima threw the car into drive, not bothering to turn on the headlights until they were well down the service road, tearing through the muddy path towards the highway. She didn't know where she was going. She had $50 in her apron pocket, wet clothes, and a stolen car. But as she glanced at the pale, muddy boy sleeping exhaustedly in the passenger seat, Cosima felt a surge of unbreakable resolve. She was no longer just the invisible fat maid of the Collins estate. She was a mother again, and she would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt her son. The stolen station wagon rattled violently as it barreled down Interstate 80, its balding tires protesting against the slick asphalt. Inside the freezing cabin, the heater was broken, blowing only tepid, stale air. Cosima kept her thick hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her eyes darting between the rain-lashed windshield and the rearview mirror. Beside her, Leo lay curled into a tight ball, wrapped in Cosima's oversized, mud-caked wool coat. The boy was shivering violently, a fever beginning to bake his small frame. The dirty water he had inhaled in the grave was taking its toll. His breathing was a shallow, wet wheeze that terrified Cosima more than the prospect of Aurelian's hitmen. They could not stop at a hospital. The Collins Syndicate had eyes and ears in every emergency room from New York to Philadelphia. The moment a muddy, unidentified 5-year-old boy, matching the description of the mob boss's heir, was admitted, heavily armed men would descend upon them before a doctor could even take his temperature. Cosima's mind raced, sifting through years of overheard conversations while serving coffee and dusting mahogany bookshelves. She needed someone outside the Collins payroll, someone who owed her. Then, a name surfaced from the depths of her memory. Dr. Harrison Miller. Years ago, before Aurelian's empire had completely solidified, Harrison had been the family's underground surgeon. He had patched up bullet wounds and knife gashes in the dead of night. But Harrison had developed a conscience and a drinking problem after failing to save a young associate. Aurelian had cast him out. It was Cosima who had secretly smuggled food and cash to Harrison out the back door of the estate, helping him flee before Aurelian's enforcers could tie up the loose end. Harrison had relocated to a dying coal town in rural Pennsylvania, running a clandestine clinic for locals who couldn't afford real health care. "Hold on, Leo," Cosima whispered, reaching out a heavy hand to stroke the boy's damp, matted hair. "Cosima knows a place. Just keep breathing, sweet boy." Meanwhile, back at the Oyster Bay estate, the dawn broke over a scene of calculated chaos. Beatrice stood in the center of the grand foyer, wrapped in a luxurious silk robe, her face buried in her hands. She was performing the role of her life. She sobbed dry, tearless heaves as the local police chief, a man heavily compensated by Aurelian's payroll, scribbled in his notepad. "I went to check on him this morning," Beatrice wailed, leaning heavily against the marble banister for dramatic effect. His bed was empty. The window was open. I thought he had just wandered off into the storm. But then... Donovan stepped forward, his face a mask of grim professional concern. "We searched the grounds, Chief. We found tracks leading to the back service road, and the old station wagon is missing." Beatrice suddenly straightened, pointing a trembling finger toward the basement stairs. "It's that Maid, Cosima, the huge, lumbering woman. I always knew there was something wrong with her. She was obsessed with Leo. She wouldn't let anyone else near him. She must have snapped. She took my baby." The chief frowned. "A woman of that stature managed to kidnap a child and steal a car without tripping the alarms. She knew the security blind spots," Beatrice snapped, her voice breaking perfectly. "She's been planning this. You have to call Aurelian. Tell him that fat lunatic stole his son." 300 miles away in Chicago, Aurelian Collins received the phone call in the middle of a high-stakes sit-down with the Russo family. Aurelian was a man carved from granite. He was ruthless, impeccably dressed, and possessed a temper that could level city blocks. When he heard Beatrice's weeping voice through the receiver, claiming the maid had abducted his only son, the color drained from his face. "She took him?" Aurelian's voice dropped to a terrifying, deadly whisper that silenced the entire boardroom. The rival bosses shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. "She must have lost her mind, Aurelian," Beatrice cried through the phone. "We're organizing search parties, but the storm washed away most of the tracks. Please come home." Aurelian slammed the phone down so hard the plastic cracked. His dark eyes blazed with a murderous fury. "Get the jet ready," he barked at his right-hand man, a scarred enforcer named Dominic, "and put $1 million bounty on the maid's head. Cosima Bailey. I want her found. I don't care what rock she crawled under. I want her brought to me alive so I can skin her myself and bring my son back. The syndicate mobilized with terrifying speed. By noon, Cosima's face, a grainy, unflattering photo taken from an old staff ID badge, was being circulated to every corrupt cop, bounty hunter, and street soldier on the eastern seaboard. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was the most hunted person in America. The town of Oak Haven, Pennsylvania, was a ghost of the American industrial age. Shuttered storefronts, rusting mining equipment, and a perpetual grey fog clung to the valley. Cosima pulled the sputtering station wagon into the gravel driveway of a dilapidated, two-story farmhouse at the edge of the woods. A faded wooden sign hung loosely by one nail: H. Miller, Veterinary and General Care. Cosima killed the engine. Her entire body ached. Her legs were swollen from the long drive, and her wet uniform had dried stiff with mud, chafing her skin raw. But she ignored the pain, hefting her large frame out of the car. She hurried to the passenger side and scooped Leo into her arms. He was burning up, his skin flushed a dangerous red, his breathing rattling in his chest. She kicked the heavy wooden door of the farmhouse until it rattled on its hinges. "Harrison, open the door!" Footsteps shuffled inside. The door creaked open, revealing a gaunt, grey-haired man in a rumpled flannel shirt. He reeked of stale coffee and cheap whiskey. Harrison Miller squinted at the massive, mud-covered woman standing on his porch. "Cosima?" he croaked, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. "Good God, woman, you look like you crawled out of a grave." "Not me," Cosima rasped, pushing past him into the dusty hallway. "Him." Harrison's eyes widened as he saw the child limp in her arms. The professional instincts he had tried to drown in alcohol instantly snapped back to the surface. "Put him on the table in the back. Now." For the next 4 hours, Cosima sat on a broken stool in the corner of the makeshift clinic, watching as Harrison worked frantically to save the boy. He hooked Leo up to an IV of strong antibiotics, suctioned the remaining fluid and dirt from his lungs, and packed ice around his small body to break the fever. Cosima didn't move. She didn't eat. She just sat there, a silent, unmovable mountain of a woman, her hands clasped in fervent prayer. Around twilight, Leo's fever finally broke. His chest rose and fell in a steady, natural rhythm. Harrison slumped into a chair across from Cosima, wiping sweat from his forehead. "He's got pneumonia, but he's strong. He'll pull through," Harrison said softly. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at Cosima, really looked at her. Her grey uniform was torn, her hands were bruised and bleeding, and her face was lined with a profound exhaustion. "What happened, Cosima? Aurelian Collins is offering $1 million for your head. Every radio station, every underground wire is buzzing. They say you went crazy and kidnapped the boy." Cosima let out a bitter, dry laugh that sounded like sandpaper. "Kidnapped him. I dug him out of the earth." Harrison froze, the glass of water pausing halfway to his mouth. "What?" Slowly, painfully, Cosima recounted the events of the previous night. She told him about the poison, the greenhouse, the deep trench, and the terrifying weight of the mud. She told him about Beatrice and Donovan. Harrison sat in stunned silence. He knew Aurelian's world was ruthless, but burying a 5-year-old child alive was a level of depravity even he couldn't stomach. "Aurelian doesn't know," Harrison whispered. "That woman, she's playing him. She's using his grief to solidify her power. If she finds you, she'll kill you both to bury the truth." "I know," Cosima said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce timbre. "That's why Aurelian can never find us. She'll get to us before he does. We have to keep moving." "You can't move him yet," Harrison gestured to the sleeping boy. "He needs at least 2 days of bed rest and IV antibiotics, or the infection will come roaring back." Cosima closed her eyes, the sheer weight of their reality pressing down on her shoulders. 2 days. In 2 days, Aurelian's men could search every inch of the state. Her fears were validated sooner than she expected. Just outside the town limits, a black SUV pulled into an abandoned gas station. Dominic, Aurelian's lead tracker, stepped out into the damp evening air. He was a lean, lethal man who moved with the grace of a predator. He walked over to a local mechanic who was nervously wiping grease from his hands. Dominic held out the grainy photo of Cosima. "You see this woman? Large build, driving a beat-up blue station wagon." The mechanic swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the thick roll of $100 bills in Dominic's other hand. Yeah, I saw a car like that. Bluing black smoke, headed up Ridge Road, toward the old docks place." Dominic smirked, tossing the money onto the oil-stained concrete. He tapped his earpiece. "Donovan, I've got a trail. Tell Beatrice we'll have the maid and the boy by midnight." Back at the farmhouse, the first sign of trouble was the sudden silence. The constant hum of crickets outside the clinic abruptly stopped. Cosima, whose senses had been hyper-tuned since the escape, stood up instantly. She moved to the window, peering through the dusty blinds. 2 black SUVs were creeping up the long gravel driveway, their headlights cut. "They're here," Cosima hissed. Harrison cursed, scrambling to his feet. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen floorboards. It leads out to the old mining tunnels. Take the boy. I'll stall them." "They'll kill you, Harrison," Cosima said, her heart hammering. "I'm already dead, Cosima." He smiled sadly. "Just go." Cosima didn't argue. She carefully unhooked Leo's IV, wrapping him tightly in a clean blanket. The boy stirred, his dark eyes fluttering open. For the first time in years, he looked at her, not with the blank stare of a traumatized ghost, but with sharp, terrified awareness. He recognized the danger. "Shh," Cosima whispered, pressing his face into her broad shoulder. "Cosima's got you. Nobody is taking you." She moved toward the kitchen with surprising speed for her size. Just as she lifted the heavy iron ring of the floorboards, the front door of the farmhouse exploded inward, splintering into the hallway. Dominic stepped inside, a suppressed pistol raised, followed by 3 heavily armed men. "Check the rooms," he barked. Cosima slipped into the dark, damp cellar, pulling the floorboards shut just as heavy boots pounded into the kitchen above her head. Through the cracks in the wood, she saw Harrison standing his ground, holding an old shotgun. "Get the hell out of my house!" he yelled. Dominic didn't even blink. He raised his pistol and fired 2 silent, lethal shots. Harrison collapsed to the floor, the shotgun clattering uselessly beside him. Cosima clamped her hand over Leo's mouth, tears streaming down her face as her old friend fell dead just inches above them. "Search the place." Dominic's voice drifted down, cold and detached. "They didn't get far. Find the fat cow and put a bullet in her head. Beatrice wants the boy brought back alive, but sedated. She doesn't want him talking to his father." Cosima's blood ran cold. Beatrice had ordered her men to take point on the search, ensuring she controlled the narrative. If they took Leo back, Beatrice would simply finish the job she started in the greenhouse. Cosima looked down at the dark, narrow dirt tunnel extending from the root cellar into the old coal mines. She tightened her grip on the boy, her jaw setting into a hard line of sheer defiance. She was outgunned, outnumbered, and physically exhausted. But she had an entire mountain of dark, claustrophobic tunnels ahead of her. And Cosima Bailey was not afraid of the dark. The Oakhaven coal mines had been abandoned for half a century, leaving behind a sprawling, subterranean labyrinth of rotting timber and unstable slate. Cosima descended into the suffocating darkness, carrying Leo on her hip. The air immediately grew frigid, smelling of sulfur, wet stone, and decaying wood. Behind them, the faint, muffled shouts of Dominic's men echoed down the shaft as they discovered the hidden root cellar. Cosima moved with a desperate, heavy grace. The tunnel was barely 5 feet high in places, forcing her to hunch her broad shoulders, her spine screaming in protest. The only light came from the intermittent sparks of a cheap, plastic lighter Cosima had grabbed from Harrison's kitchen counter. Its frail, orange flame cast long, monstrous shadows against the weeping walls of the mine. "Hold on tight, Leo," Cosima breathed heavily, her chest heaving as she navigated the treacherous footing. The ground was slick with black, oily sludge. "We just need to go deep enough. They won't know the layout." Leo clung to her neck, his small body shivering beneath the heavy blanket. He was terrified, but the fever had broken, leaving him weak, yet lucid. He buried his face in Cosima's thick, comforting shoulder, trusting her entirely. To the boy, Cosima was not just a maid. She was a titan, an immovable force that even the earth could not swallow. 10 minutes into their descent, the beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight pierced the darkness behind them, slicing through the dusty air like a physical blade. "They went this way," a harsh voice echoed. It was Dominic. "I see footprints in the mud! Move!" Cosima extinguished the lighter immediately. Total, impenetrable darkness swallowed them. Panic flared in her chest, but she forced it down. She knew they couldn't outrun armed men in a straight line. She had to use the environment. She felt her way along the cold rock wall, her large hands sweeping the surface until she found a narrow offshoot tunnel. She squeezed her large frame into the crevice, pulling Leo tight against her chest, and held her breath. Footsteps splashed through the sludge. The beams of 3 flashlights swept past their hiding spot. Dominic and 2 heavily armed enforcers walked right past them, their weapons raised. "Keep pushing forward," Dominic commanded, his voice growing fainter. "She can't move fast carrying the kid." Cosima waited until the glow of their lights faded into a distant halo before she dared to exhale. She turned to move deeper into the side tunnel, but as she took a step, her heavy boot caught on a rusted iron mining track hidden beneath the mud. She stumbled forward, with her arms wrapped around Leo to protect him. She couldn't break her fall. Cosima hit the ground hard, her knee slamming into jagged slate with a sickening crunch. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips before she could bite it back. The sound echoed loudly down the main corridor. The flashlights ahead abruptly stopped moving. "Did you hear that?" Dominic's voice snapped. "Behind us! The side shaft! Turn around!" Cosima tried to stand, but her right knee buckled instantly. Agony shot up her thigh. She was trapped. She looked up and saw the beams of light rapidly approaching the entrance of their narrow tunnel. "Leo," Cosima whispered urgently, her voice trembling. "Listen to me. I need you to crawl backward. Hide behind that pile of rocks. Do not make a sound. No matter what happens to me, you stay hidden." Leo shook his head violently in the dark, his small hands gripping her torn uniform. "Do it!" Cosima commanded, a fierce, maternal authority in her tone. Reluctantly, the boy scrambled backward into the shadows. Cosima dragged her heavy body forward, placing herself directly in the center of the narrow passage. She was a massive, insurmountable obstacle of flesh and bone, blocking any path to the child. She looked up at the ceiling of the tunnel. It was supported by a thick, ancient wooden beam, heavily bowed and groaning under the weight of the earth above. The wood was black with rot. The flashlights hit her face, blinding her. "Well, well," Dominic smirked, stepping into the passage, his suppressed pistol aimed directly at Cosima's head. "Look what we found, the $1 million pig in the mud." "Where is the boy, Cosima?" Cosima spat a wad of black, bloody saliva onto Dominic's expensive boots. "In hell. Waiting for you." Dominic's eyes hardened. He raised the gun. "Beatrice sends her regards." Cosima didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a guttural, primal roar. Mustering every ounce of her substantial weight and immense physical strength, she lunged upward from her good leg. She didn't attack Dominic. She threw her broad shoulders directly into the rotting, load-bearing timber supporting the tunnel roof. With a massive crack, the ancient wood shattered. The earth groaned. Dominic's eyes widened in sheer terror as he realized what she had done, but he didn't even have time to pull the trigger. Tons of slate, mud, and rock collapsed from the ceiling in a thunderous avalanche. Cosima threw herself backward, shielding her head. The cave-in buried the entrance to the tunnel entirely, crushing Dominic and his men under a mountain of unforgiving earth. A thick cloud of choking black dust filled the air, followed by a profound, ringing silence. Cosima coughed violently, waving the dust away. Her entire body felt broken, but she was alive. The tunnel was now permanently sealed from the main shaft. "Leo!" She coughed into the darkness. Small hands reached out in the pitch black, finding her face. Leo pressed his forehead against hers. He was safe. Cosima flicked the lighter on. The flame illuminated a steep, upward-sloping ventilation shaft at the back of their sealed cavern. Faint, grey morning light filtered down from the top. "Come on, sweet boy," Cosima wheezed, gritting her teeth against the agonizing pain in her knee. "We're almost out." It took them an hour to climb the 50-foot incline. Cosima practically pushed Leo up the crumbling dirt incline, dragging her own useless leg behind her. When they finally broke through the rusted iron grate at the surface, they collapsed onto the wet grass of a high, wooded ridge overlooking the valley. They had survived the night. But as Cosima looked down at the valley road below, her heart stopped. A convoy of 5 black Cadillac Escalades was roaring up the mountain road, flanked by local police cruisers. At the center of the convoy was a customized, armor-plated Lincoln Navigator. Aurelian Collins had arrived. The convoy screeched to a halt at the edge of the woods, right where the ventilation shaft opened onto the ridge. Dozens of men in dark suits poured out, weapons drawn, forming a perimeter. Cosima couldn't run. She was physically destroyed, her clothes practically shredded, her face coated in black coal dust and dried blood. She pulled Leo behind her large, protective frame, sitting heavily on the wet grass, waiting for the end. The rear door of the Lincoln opened. Aurelian Collins stepped out. He wore a pristine black overcoat, his face a terrifying mask of controlled fury, his eyes locked onto Cosima, cold and dead. Right behind him stepped Beatrice. She was dressed in elegant, mournful black, a silk scarf wrapped around her neck. As soon as she saw Cosima, a look of malicious triumph flashed across her beautiful face. "There she is!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a manicured finger. "Aurelian, she's got him! Shoot her! She's a monster!" Aurelian raised his hand, silencing Beatrice instantly. He walked slowly up the ridge, stopping 10 feet from Cosima. Half a dozen enforcers raised their assault rifles, laser sights painting Cosima's chest with red dots. "You took my son, Cosima," Aurelian said, his voice deadly quiet. "You stole the only thing I have left in this world. Give him to me, and I will make your death quick. Resist, and I will make it last for days." Cosima looked up at the terrifying Mafia boss. She didn't cower. She didn't cry. She felt a profound sense of peace. She had saved the boy. That was all that mattered. "I didn't steal him, Mr. Collins," Cosima rasped, her voice rough from the dust. "I unearthed him." Aurelian frowned, the pistol in his hand wavering slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Don't listen to the fat lunatic!" Beatrice yelled, stepping forward, her composure cracking. "She's lying! She poisoned him! She dragged him into the storm! Look at her, Aurelian, she's insane!" Cosima ignored Beatrice. She looked directly into Aurelian's eyes. "Check his mouth, Aurelian. Check his lungs. Ask your corrupt doctors to test his blood for the heavy sedatives she gave him. I didn't take him from his bed. I dug him out of the old greenhouse trench with my bare hands after your beautiful fiancée, and Donovan buried him alive." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ridge. The wind howled through the pines. Aurelian's eyes darted between Cosima and Beatrice. Beatrice's face had drained of all colour. "Aurelian, please," she stammered, stepping back. "She's making it up. She's trying to save herself." "He was breathing dirt," Cosima continued, her voice gaining strength. "She wanted him gone so she could give you new heirs. She threw him in the mud and patted it down." Aurelian lowered his gun slightly. He looked at the boy hiding behind Cosima's massive frame. "Leo," Aurelian said softly. "Come here, son." Leo peeked out from behind Cosima's waist. He looked at his father. Then he looked at Beatrice, the woman who had poured him the poisoned hot chocolate, the woman who had smiled as the dirt hit his face. For 3 years since his mother's violent death, Leo had not uttered a single syllable. Doctors had told Aurelian the boy was locked inside his own mind, paralyzed by trauma, perhaps permanently mute. Leo took a step forward. He looked directly at the towering Mafia boss. He took a deep, rattling breath of the cold mountain air, and for the first time in over 1,000 days, he spoke. "She put the dirt on my face, Papa." Leo's voice was small, raspy, and achingly clear. He pointed a trembling, muddy finger at Beatrice. "It was heavy. I couldn't breathe. Cosima pulled me out. Cosima saved me." The world seemed to stop spinning. Aurelian Collins stood frozen, the words of his mute son hitting him harder than any bullet ever could. The realization washed over him in a horrifying, violent wave. He looked at his son, filthy and shivering, and then he slowly turned his head to look at the woman he had almost married. Beatrice took another step back, her hands raised in terror. "Aurelian. Aurelian. Wait. The boy is confused. He's sick." Aurelian didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply turned to his second-in-command. "Take her," Aurelian whispered, a terrifying void in his eyes. "Take her and Donovan to the warehouse in Brooklyn. Tell the boys to clear their schedules. I want them kept alive until I get there." 2 massive men grabbed Beatrice by the arms. She kicked and screamed, her elegant facade shattering entirely as she was dragged down the hill and thrown into the back of an Escalade. Her shrieks were quickly silenced by the slamming of the heavy doors. Aurelian dropped his gun into the grass. He fell to his knees in the mud, heedless of his expensive coat. He held out his arms. Leo ran to his father, burying his face in Aurelian's chest. Aurelian wrapped his arms tightly around the boy, burying his face in Leo's dirty hair, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. Cosima watched them, a tired smile touching her cracked lips. Her vision blurred, and the adrenaline finally left her system. She slumped backward onto the wet grass, the dark edge of unconsciousness pulling her under. The last thing she felt was Aurelian Collins's strong hand gently gripping her shoulder, and his voice, thick with emotion, ordering his men to get a medical team immediately. "Save her," Aurelian commanded. "Whatever it takes, save her." The Collins estate underwent a massive transformation in the years that followed. The heavy, dark curtains were pulled back, allowing light into the previously tomb-like halls. The syndicate remained, but the house itself became a sanctuary. Cosima Bailey never polished a banister or scrubbed a floor again. Elevated from her invisible status, she became the undisputed matron of the household, a woman feared and deeply respected by every hardened criminal who walked through the front doors. They knew she was the woman who had moved the earth itself for the boss's son. Leo flourished, his silence broken permanently, his bond with Cosima remaining the cornerstone of his life. True strength, Aurelian Collins learned, didn't lie in violence or intimidation. It resided in the fierce, unyielding love of an overlooked woman who refused to let the darkness win. The world learned that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in the most unexpected packages.